and I will let everybody in. And Glenn is walking off.
I'm looking
Glenn is just walking away.
for.
Hey, welcome. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live. I'm Todd DiPastino, the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. And tonight we're talking about the history of the Holocaust with Doug Cervi. And Glenn Flickinger is our master of ceremonies here. But before I throw it to Glenn, I just want to welcome Susan Friedenberg. We haven't seen her in a long time. Good to see you, Susan. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm also pleased to see that we have Bern Milland here. I met Bern in California, and when we were at Santa Monica, I met him on the USS Iowa, Battleship Iowa. He's a retired full colonel with a really interesting story, and I hope he'll contribute to the conversation tonight. Okay, without any further ado, I introduce you the very good Glenn Flickinger.
One of these days, I'm going to get to that great level. But Todd is a master of incentivizing. So he just, wants me to keep reaching. Maybe, never mind. I won't go any further. So welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have everybody on. I see a lot of familiar names. So for those who might not know me, Glenn Flickinger. I host this almost every Thursday night program called Greatest Generation Live for Todd and the VBC. Basically all things World War II. A lot of veteran interviews. In fact, Todd and I were talking about, believe it or not, it's still hard for me to believe we can find new World War II veterans, but two World War II veterans that we're in touch with just recently. One we never heard of, and he lives here in Pittsburgh, and the other, someone we've known about up in Minnesota, and we're hoping to have them on somewhere in the next few weeks. So as many veteran interviews as we can still do. And of course, lots of authors and lots of experts on different World War II topics. And before we go further, Susan, is she unmuted? Let me unmute you, Susan. Todd, thank you, Susan, for being on. But I want to thank you for introducing us to our speaker tonight, Doug Cervi. Thank you.
Well, Doug is like a brother to me. He and his wife are dearest friends, and Doug really helped my father get past his PTSD by speaking. Doug will talk about how he had Daddy, and you're going to meet the grandson of another survivor, I think in June. But he really helped my dad to purge all of his angst over Omaha Beach and the war by having Daddy speak to high schools and colleges. And I love Doug. He's actually the executor of my will. I love you.
Well, I imagine there's some trust involved in that also, Susan.
He and his wife. I adore Kelly. She is my little Facebook soulmate, and they're wonderful people. I adore them. God bless you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So tonight, the program is on the history of the Holocaust. We've done probably 8 or 10, a dozen Holocaust programs over the years, at least the ones that I've been involved in. Todd, I know, has done more. But they've always been stories of the Holocaust, stories of survivors, stories of World War II vets in one case that helped liberate Dachau. Some excellent stories, riveting. Every single one is always riveting. And thanks to Scott Masters. Scott, I see on tonight. We've had some Holocaust survivors themselves on the program. But what we hadn't done, and I hope people agree with this, is kind of just do a basic history of the Holocaust. Okay, here's what happened, why it happened, how it happened, etc. So we're very lucky. I somehow mentioned this to Susan and whatever, and she introduced me to Doug. Doug, just wave and say hello so people know you're here. There you go. And you're unmuted. Yeah, good.
Yes, I am.
So just a little bit about Doug. He is really a Holocaust scholar for many, many years. Graduate of Pennsylvania Military College, now Widener. Is that the right pronunciation?
Correct.
Widener University, degree in history. in education, taught and coached at Oak Crest High School for 41 years. So you must have started when you were like 10 years old, Doug.
Yeah, I tell my students I was born in 1906.
He currently teaches at Stockton University. He teaches classes on the Holocaust and genocide for the past 12 years. He's the former executive director of the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education, retired from that recently, and he's a retired captain in the New Jersey National Guard. So he's a veteran as well. Doug, this is as close to perfection as I can find. No
Well,
pressure.
Thank
No
you very
pressure.
much for the kind words.
Yeah. Anything else about your background that we should know, Doug?
I have three brothers. My wife is here trying to make sure I behave myself. My dad was a World War II veteran, was a B-17 radio operator in the 6th Army Air Force, which a lot of people don't know about because it was in the Caribbean is where he spent his time during the war. Thank goodness. When they split his class up, half the guys went to Europe and the other half went to the West Coast. And fortunately, he survived the war. But if he had gone to Europe, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Neither would my three brothers, and he would have never gotten married to my mom in New Mexico after the war, which is kind of an interesting story in itself. And we may or may not get to that. My grandfather was a World War I veteran, hopped off the boat from Italy in 1914, and then got drafted. And as a result of that, eventually, survived that. So there's a lot of military in our background in our family.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us about your time as an officer in the New Jersey National Guard.
Well, I was very fortunate. The Vietnam War ended in March of 73. I graduated in May of 73, and they don't call us, we'll call you. I was then did the 3-month officers course down in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and came back to this area that had a 155 unit but no tanks. So I said, that's close enough. And I did that for 5 years, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, as a lot of people know. But I was coaching at the time, and it was really difficult to do the weekends and coaching because I was coaching 3 sports. So I gave up the military stuff and then started teaching high school for 41 years, survived that. And now I've been teaching at a college for the last 12 years and enjoyed immensely.
You were born in 1906. That's a lot of experience. That's a lot of stuff, Doug. Congratulations on what a wonderful career. So let's get started on this. Doug has prepared a wonderful PowerPoint to walk us through the history of the Holocaust and in some very unique ways, I think. I think it comes from his long history of teaching this, because I imagine there's many different ways it could be taught. Plus, of course, we're asking Doug to take what probably is a 2-semester course and give it to us in the next 45 minutes to an hour. So always tricky to do that. So let me share a screen here with everybody and get the slideshow up and going, and we'll get started.
And feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll get to those as soon as we can. If you want to stop one slide, that's not a problem. To give you a little bit of background, I didn't know anything about this till I was a senior in college, and it was mentioned in class. And as a result of that, I was really stunned that I had never even heard the word. Little did I realize I had gone to high school with about 17 kids whose parents were survivors. And my 3-day unit turned into a 1-week unit that turned into a 3-week unit. And now I'm being able to teach it in college. The thing that's interesting about this, having been to the site several times and knowing several survivors and bringing them into my high school students, is that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about this. And most states, only 25 states, require Holocaust genocide education in their curriculums on some level with appropriate materials. But also you have 25 states that don't teach this at all. So when they do these surveys a lot of times and they say, well, I can't believe these high school kids don't know this. Well, it's not really their fault because they're not being taught it in the schools that we have in the United States. So that's kind of like left up in the air to a certain extent. So the Holocaust basically by definition was the unprecedented event of industrialized murder of Jews and non-Jews from 1933 to 1945, where you had 11 million people that were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. You can go to the next one. This I put up every semester. I usually give my students a quiz the first day, which is 50 questions. And a lot of them were under the impression that it started with gas chambers, and it didn't. It started with people being divided versus us versus them, and also by words and not gas chambers. And then what happens? People turn their blind eye to what's going on, and before they know it, then you're dealing with genocide. Go ahead. Now, what I did, I got this book maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I've incorporated it into my course. And you're going to see not all of the 8 questions, but Dr. Hayes, who was a professor at Northwestern University, and now it works at the Holocaust Museum of Washington, D.C., got overriding questions. And I do this with my own students where I ask them, what do they want to know? Why did they take this course? And that way there I get a feel for why they are in the course in itself. And our university, believe it or not, has more courses on the Holocaust and genocide than any university in the world, which is kind of interesting for a small D3 school in southern New Jersey by the beach. Go ahead. And we'll go through these pretty quick, since I have, quite a few slides here. And if you do get bored, just raise your hand and let me know. Why the Jews? Why not some other group that they may have targeted? Go ahead.
Okay.
Got your arrows. Why the Germans? A lot of people ask that. A lot of the students ask that. Why Germany? Why not another country? And if you know at that time, in spite of the loss that they had with World War I and their displeasure with the Treaty of Versailles, is that why the Germans and not Austrians or not the Russians, or why not America or Norway or Sweden or whatever it might have been? Because you would not have thought at this time the Germans, with science and music and accounting and everything else that was going on in Germany, they were considered the best in the world. And it was almost like people were kind of shocked after this occurred that this did take place in Germany. Go ahead.
So if I could ask a question.
Go.
Knowing my German history pretty well, this also didn't start just with Adolf Hitler. There's
No.
a history of anti-Semitism in Germany and in Europe and maybe in the world going back hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, we go centuries. I mean, the anti-Semitism, and I spent a whole 2-hour class on that. And then you have different, what is anti-Semitism by definition? And then what is economic anti-Semitism, racial anti-Semitism, cultural and religious anti-Semitism, which a lot of the students are unaware of. And I think even today, a lot of people kind of focus in the racial anti-Semitism that was invented by the Nazis on a way to get rid of these people that were in their country, that stabbed them back during the war, and all these fallacious things that had been taught. But I actually had 6 students in my classes that told me that the Holocaust did not occur. And one student actually stood up in class in a public school with a very diverse class and says, why do we have to study this? You know it didn't happen. You know how the Jews are. And I said, well, look, it's by law that I have to. And even if it wasn't, I would go ahead and teach it anyway. But the thing is that the deal is, let me know at the end of the class. We'll spend 3 weeks on this. You're going to see the film, The Pianist. You're going to see my friend that was in Auschwitz for 2.5 years. So as a result of that, you let me know whether it occurred or not, and then we'll go from there. So he sat down. He actually was standing up, which is shocking in a public school. Now, I had to do that when I went to a Catholic grade school, because if you didn't, the nuns would beat you. And those that are Catholic from that era probably can understand that situation. And he says, well, I got the information from my parents. And I says, well, where did your parents get their information from? Now, I live down near Atlantic City, for those that know geography, in South Jersey. And he goes, well, my parents are in the Ku Klux Klan. And that was in 2004. So that's only 21 years ago. Now, the upside to this story is I saw him because I painted houses in the summer for 35 years as a teacher. I saw him at Home Depot with his wife and his 3-year-old daughter. And he goes, sir, how you doing? I go, good. I said, your wife? He goes, yes, here's my daughter. And I want to let you know one thing. My daughter will know that the Holocaust happened.
Wow. That's got to make you feel good as a teacher.
That made my whole career.
Yeah.
That made my career. Go ahead, you go to the next one. I think there might have been a question there too. Somebody had their hand up. Why murder? Why not just try to have the Jews leave the country, immigrate someplace else? And most people aren't aware of, especially with my students, that less than 2% of the German population at the time in 1933 were Jews. And they did not see themselves as Jews, they saw themselves as Germans. They were very much assimilated into the society. They had done very well. And we'll get into some of the Hitler issues in a minute. And this you might have seen before, is the iconic photograph that was not at Auschwitz when it opened in 1940, but eventually gets built by 42, 43. And then the trains came in because it made it a little bit more efficient for them to get more people to the crematoriums and the gas chambers, all right, faster, rather than have to walk the mile, mile and a half from the actual train station that is in Auschwitz, which was renamed Auschwitz by the Germans. Go ahead. Why was it so swift and sweeping? Because they made the decision after the Wannsee conference that they were going to get rid of the Jews, and the faster you got rid of them, the faster they could win the war. Okay? This is a really big, huge misconception that the Jews did not fight back. And I also tell my students, I said, you have to realize one of the reasons that a lot of people did not fight back is they did not know how this was going to end. And fighting back, eventually, over 25,000 Jews themselves will fight back armed resistance. And there's different levels of resistance. You have, resistance by religious resistance, having schools, having practiced your religion. There's a lot of different ways, which a lot of people in the United States, or mostly the students, think when you say resistance, it's always armed resistance. And there was significant resistance. There was undergrounds in all the concentration and the death camps. You had Treblinka, Sobibor, and even Auschwitz, where you did have revolts, a lot of them unsuccessful, but successful to the point that we know that they took place. So that information has to be passed down. I was very lucky on the second time that I went to Auschwitz that a woman who taught at the University of Connecticut was actually the person that wrote the book Defiance, which they turned into a film about the Bielski brothers that saved 1,200 Jews by fighting the Germans during the war. Go ahead. Why such limited help? As all of us know, there was the three-front war that was going on around the world. This photograph was taken by American planes that had flown over Auschwitz and then eventually flew into the Soviet Union where they had to refuel. That was not deciphered until 1975. And there's a continuing controversy over why didn't we bomb more of these camps, and a lot of us are well aware of our losses. In fact, there was a 75% loss rate for the 8th Air Force during the war. And even when the 15th Air Force came available out of Italy at the time, bombing the camps was not the priority because the feeling was that we can end the war faster and not use our resources for this. Though David, who you'll eventually meet, Wisnia, who was in Auschwitz for 2.5 years, remembers the bombing because he was there, and they were hoping for more bombing, but obviously that didn't happen because of the logistics at the time. Go ahead.
Just let's spend a couple minutes on that. And
Go ahead.
If there's anybody asking in the chat or on, raising a hand. So two parts of this I'd like to explore, because I've read a lot about the decisions made by the 8th Air Force to not bomb certain places, right? The concentration camps. And there was, as I understood it, there were several thoughts. One you already expressed: we got a big war to fight and we're better off fighting that war and getting it done. But the other is, did we really want to go in and bomb a camp and kill tens of thousands of people, perhaps, right? I mean, I hate to say it this way, but the PR look of that would have been pretty terrible in and of itself. The other discussion was, by the 8th Air Force was, well, let's not bomb the camps, let's just bomb the tracks that lead into the camp. And the answer there was, all over Europe during World War II, we bombed lots of railroad tracks. Guess what? Railroad tracks are pretty easy to put back together again. They're up and operating in 48 hours. Is that a reasonable summary of that?
Yeah, that pretty well sums it up. And the other thing I think there's a misconception, even with modern times, is we look at all the munitions that are being used currently in the current war over in the Middle East, is that the bombing, and we say it's not near as precise, they were fortunate if they even hit the camp.
Yeah.
Even if you did carpet bombing. So it wasn't as precise as we have in 2026. And you're right, even if you were successful in bombing the tracks, there was enough workers. Like the Auschwitz camp were 3 camps. You had Auschwitz I, which is a former Polish army barracks. You had Birkenau, or Auschwitz II, which is on the screen. And then you had Auschwitz III, which was Buna Morowitz, which was a synthetic oil and synthetic rubber camp along with other types of subcamps for all of these main camps. And a lot of people are unaware also that there were around 42,000 different camps, which is significant because most people think there's about maybe 200 or 300 all over Europe at this time. So it would have been very difficult even to fly all of those planes to get them there and bomb the camp. And you're right, there could be a PR issue. Talking to David and some of the other survivors that I knew that were at Auschwitz, they would have welcomed the bombing. They says, bomb away.
Yeah.
But obviously, we didn't know that information at the time.
Doug, can I propose another controversial idea that I think is
Sure.
plausible? And that is that there was so much anti-Semitism in the United States,
Yes.
and there was concern that, say, a B-17 or a B-24 was going to, bomb Auschwitz. The plane would be shot down. You'd have 10 dead Americans, and then FDR would have to answer to that. These Americans were killed trying to liberate Jews or something like that, and it just wasn't, given the anti-Semitism in the country, they didn't want to introduce that kind of a divisive war aim.
Yeah, and Roosevelt was there's a really good book on. What was the name of the title of the book? I'm trying to remember right now. Oh, Roosevelt and the Jews, or Jews and Roosevelt, which was written by two Jewish authors and historians. And he didn't want to be perceived that we're fighting this war to save the Jews because of the anti-Semitism that existed at the time. I mean, if you wanted to rate which country was probably more anti-Semitic, the United States might be third on the list. You might have had Austria first and Germany second and the United States third. And just a lot of people don't even realize, and I think a lot of people here have probably seen, that in Madison Square Garden, they had one of the largest, Bund rallies in New York City in the United States. And you had several camps in North Jersey and Bergen County where they were training kids, for the German Americans to go fight for the motherland, or the fatherland, as the case may be. So there is controversy there. There's no question about that.
If I could ask one other related question, what's the timeline of what we, the United States government, especially the Roosevelt administration, relative to what they knew, to what degree, about the German extermination program?
Mm-hmm.
When did we finally appreciate? I know I've seen lots of things, I've read lots of things about different relief groups, different Jewish organizations coming to the state and trying to impress upon the Roosevelt administration how serious this was. But when did that occur? And did the light bulb ever go off in our heads, being the U.S. government's head, before we actually found the camps?
The Jan Karski, who was a Polish diplomat, actually snuck into a camp and got back out, eventually got to England, came to the United States, had a meeting with Roosevelt, and told him what he saw. And then you had just recently a film that was made about the two Jews that escaped from Auschwitz, went to at the time, the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. And the Jews there didn't believe these two guys. Yeah. I had emailed the one guy, Rudolf Verba, who became a pharmacologist in British Columbia and Canada before his passing. And that was actually the first book that I read on the Holocaust, called The Factory of Death, which was published in 1960 in England, actually. And one of my students happened to give it to me. This was probably 1976, 77, I guess. And so the United States was aware, but a lot of people still didn't believe that the Germans were doing this, because they didn't have any photographs. And this is just, by word of mouth. Jan Karski had no reason to lie about this, being, a Polish Catholic. And now the question is, what do we do? And that became another issue. I mean, I'm reading a really good book right now on George Marshall and all the problems that he was dealing with. When did we attack? And Stalin trying to get him attacked to open a second front to take the pressure off the Russians. And we were behind the eight ball. The United States was not ready for a war. And by the time we could get the resources to stop some of this, it was almost too late to a certain extent. Could we have done more? Probably. Could we have done more? There's no doubt. But, that you can probably argue to the cows come home as far as what we could have done and what we should have done.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions before we move on, Todd?
I saw Gil had his hand up, but now his hand is down. So we'll get to Gil. We'll get to
Okay.
Gil later.
We'll take a break in about 4 or 5 more slides.
Yeah, I just see somebody posted up here. They want to know about the Vonsite conference. I think I actually have a picture of that on here. All right. This is the most important thing. I spend almost a class and a half on this with the students, try to answer all of their questions. What have we learned from this? I mean, unfortunately, probably not as much as we should have. People were probably under the impression that after the Holocaust took place, we wouldn't have any more genocides. And you can name 10, 15 that have taken place. 3 of them are going on right now. So unfortunately, as humans, we haven't learned enough from history, and we do repeat the legacy from the past, unfortunately.
What is this statue? Where is it?
Statue? That is of the guys, the women and men that fought at the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising that took place in 1943-44. All of those people on that monument, which is right next to the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, are all died fighting. I mean, people did escape through the sewers and some did get out, and the rest of them, 56,000, were taken to Auschwitz and murdered.
In and of itself, the Warsaw Uprising is one of the world's most terrible events, much less
Yes.
being a tiny part of the whole story.
For those of you that have not, the reason I put this a double slide is that this is the Holocaust Museum down in DC. We just took 140 college students down there 2 Sundays ago. And it's being closed for renovations, which Michael Birnbaum, who was one of my graduate professors here at Stockton, who lives in LA, believe it or not, the guy flew in every Wednesday to teach a 3-hour class and then flew home.
Yes.
He's considered one of the world's experts on the Holocaust and genocide. But this building, if you ever do get a chance to go to DC, it's worthwhile. Go ahead.
I've been there I've been there once. I think my kids were junior high school age. I can't remember exactly how long, but after about 2 hours in it, it got so heavy and so depressing, I had to walk outside and take a break for a while.
Mhm. That's understandable. For those that are people from Jersey, this is a picture or a statue of an American soldier rescuing somebody at Dachau by Ellis Island. And I always put this up because I teach obviously in New Jersey. My students, some of them have actually seen this. For those, the definition, and people throw this word around, unfortunately, and this was written by the 1948 convention that took place in San Francisco, in California, to get a workable definition of what genocide is and is not. This probably needs to be updated, but I don't think the world community at this point wants to sit down and rewrite this. And there's not a number in here. The gentleman that came up with this was a lawyer and a survivor of the Holocaust. And this is what Putin's been accused of, as far as taking over 25,000 kids from Ukraine into the Soviet Union. You have, crimes against humanity and war crimes, which we'll eventually get to when we do the Nuremberg part of the presentation. And I'm trying to squeeze in 60 hours of teaching into 45 minutes. So I'm trying to rush this as best I can. All right, go ahead. For those of you, I probably should have asked you this before this. The first genocide of the 20th century was not the Holocaust, and the Pope actually got this wrong. And I had to make sure that he knew that it was not the Armenian genocide. This was the Nama-Herero genocide that took place in German West Africa, and there was no Nazis at the time. This was just done by the German government at the time with the Kaiser. Go ahead. The second one being the Armenian genocide that took place between 1915 and 1918 in what was then the Ottoman Empire, where you had 1.5 million Armenians that were murdered. And the Turkish government to this day still says this did not happen. Go ahead. The Ukrainian genocide, which was man-made by Stalin because the Ukrainians wanted to maintain their independence after World War I, and they didn't want to go along with this collectivization of these farms. This is known as the Holodomor, and this is a genocide. The numbers, we don't know exact numbers, is between 7 and 10 million people were starved by Stalin at this time.
What was the name of it again?
A Holodomor, which is right up here on the screen.
Ah, I see. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all right.
What does that mean? Is there some meaning to that?
It's the Holodomor is the Ukrainian phrase for this genocide.
Okay. So we were all practicing all this before Adolf Hitler came along.
Yes, those had all taken place, and when Hitler comes around, and one of the things that I say to the students, the reason he ended up hating the Jews so bad because of his life, his life situation wasn't really that great, is that the Jews basically had everything that he wanted. And then he bought into the stab in the back theory after World War I, and his anti-Semitism was lethal, without a doubt. Go ahead.
So maybe we, with this next slide, we take well, let's go through this and then we'll take a break and get questions from the audience.
Yeah, one of the definitions that I gave in the beginning is that it took place between 1933 and 1945. There were 3 genocides that were taken care of, at the time simultaneously. Hitler comes to power being appointed the chancellor. Wasn't the president because he lost that job twice. Then the Reichstag fire takes place. He blames that on the Jews. Then he gets the Enabling Act, which gives him dictatorial powers for a year, which he never relinquished. As a result of that, the Nuremberg laws gets passed about who was a German and who wasn't. And the Jews obviously couldn't be Germans because of the racial laws. Kristallnacht takes place in November of 1938, where every single synagogue in Germany is burned down, along with thousands of people that were killed and businesses destroyed as a result of the anti-Semitism that was done by the stormtroopers. The Einsatzgruppen, they were the killing squads because most of the Jews had left Germany at the time. So when they invaded the Soviet Union, having split Poland in half, so you have about 2.5 to 3 million Polish Jews, and then you have an additional amount of Jews from Russia. What are we going to do with all these people? And the decision had been made at the Wannsee conference, which somebody had asked about, which I've been to that building, which is it's on a beautiful lake, gorgeous piece of property, probably run you $20 million in 2026 money, where they made a decision about how they were going to, quote, evacuate the Jews. HBO did a really good program on this called The Conspiracy, which is an hour and a half long, which is how long that meeting took place. You had 15 upper end, military personnel from the SS, along with people that were working in the Nazi government, sat down in an hour and a half and decided how they were going to murder 11 million people, which did not include the Jews that were in the United States and Central and South America. But that was going to come later after they won the war. As far as the death camps go, there were only 6 of them. And I don't mean to say only, because people died in concentration camps, usually after 3 months or less. But you had most of the people that were murdered in the camps. That was by design, and they had gotten it down to a science by the time of Rudolf Hess, who was the commandant at Auschwitz, where they were murdered anywhere from between 8 and 10,000 people per day. Then eventually the liberation comes through, and I'll have a slide which I'll show you about that, where the Russians liberate Auschwitz on January 27th, 1945. That is now known as International Holocaust Remembrance Day throughout the world about what had taken place. And David Wishnia, who you're going to meet later on, in 2020, I went to the 75th anniversary of that. I was very fortunate to be there with his family, which was a very emotional time for a lot of people. There were about 2,000 people there inside this tent. I would say there might have been 200 survivors. The last time for the 80th anniversary, I think there were 9.
Wow. So
yeah, we're down to the nitty gritty here.
I took down the presentation. We're about halfway through it so that we could get into any discussion of questions that are in the chat. Todd or anybody, I know Gil's had his hand raised.
Yes, Gil.
I've got a very simple question. What would be the rationale under any circumstance to bomb a target with unknown contents, namely human beings in it, except for the fact that if you knew it was a prisoner of war camp or a death camp, and it was tying down a whole bunch of German soldiers called the SS, I can see bombing the artificial rubber plant next to it, but why would you bomb the camp and eliminate people who are struggling just to survive? I mean, what would be the benefit?
Well, talking to the survivors that I've met, and I asked them about that, we were in the camp at the time, their feeling was that if they did bomb the camp, even though, and they knew it was a death camp, they had about 100,000 people at all three of these camps. You had 8,000 SS, 173 of them women at all three of these camps, that if they did bomb them, they might be able to escape. Now, the difference between Auschwitz versus Sobibor, which was also a death camp, Sobibor on the outside was ringed with landmines. Auschwitz was not. Escaping, they would hope towards the end of the war, even if they died during the bombing, they said they would have accepted that. And so for them, you're right. I would agree with what you're saying, that you're going to probably kill. Let's say you dropped, the 5,000 pounds that were on a B-17 or the 8,000 that are on a B-24, you're going to do some serious damage with a 500-pound bomb. I mean, the killing radius is going to be almost like 40 meters. But that's a good point.
Did you come across the Kinderzug, the children's trains that took Jewish children out of Germany before a certain date, between your bullets, maybe the 5th and the 6th? I know a family that the children went to Sweden and grew up there until the end of the war. The parents were fortunate to get out of Landsberg and make it to London, and the whole family got together after the war. But that was allowed by the German government, the Nazi government, up to a point.
Yeah, they let there was 10,000 kids, the kinder transport that went to England. You had Witten, excuse me, that saved, oh geez, I can't remember. I don't want to give you the wrong number. Kids in Austria, when he took them, he got them out of the country. They made a really good film about that. And you're right. I mean, and the thing is, you still have a significant number of people at that time that didn't believe that the Germans were doing this.
Yeah.
Even with the concentration camp.
And the last point is, I was personally involved in a situation where in Berlin itself, at the end of the war, when we allowed, for genuinely good reasons, the Russians to capture Berlin, they rounded up non-military aged men, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, took them to the same death camp you're talking about, just north of it, near Oranienburg. But in the meantime, they were placed in Hohenschönhausen Gefängnis, and those 20,000 men never came home. They were worked to death in the Ukraine. One of them was my wife's cousin. Wow. And they didn't find out, except through the International Red Cross, until about 15 years ago, that he'd even died, or where, or how long he lasted. I mean, these people didn't last very long. The Russians took out their revenge. I mean, they're excellent at that. And even the Russian army took out their revenge on the Russian prisoners who were shot after they were liberated, maybe 2 or 3 kilometers down the road. Yes. Because they didn't want them returning with any aspirations of democracy.
Yeah, I went to school with a guy who was talking to his mom on the phone. So I said to him, I go, Boris, what language was that? And he goes, it's Russian. I said, you're Russian? He goes, Boris. He goes, come on. And I said, the guy was a really good defensive end. And I said to him, I go, when did your family, he said, well, my dad was in the Russian army during the war, and he had surrendered, and he was starting to go back to Russia. And some guy said, where are you going? He goes, well, I'm going home. They go, well, Stalin's killing you guys. So he turned around, got on a boat, and came to the United States, and eventually lived up in Bordentown, New Jersey. So he found out about that. But you're right, the gulags were not a nice place to be, that's for sure.
It's a interesting debate as to who was worse, the Germans or the Russians. It's maybe doesn't matter. They were both abominable. Other questions? Yes, Susan, did we?
She's still muted, I think.
Yeah. You need to unmute, Susan. There you go.
Thank you. I thought I haven't been on in a while. I haven't been on in a while. So, Doug, I just want some clarification on this. My father always said the Jews all over America knew what was going on in Europe. They knew what Hitler was doing, but we never got involved until Pearl Harbor was bombed. And then that was our venue, if you will, I'm using the wrong word, to get involved in the war in Germany. And as you know, the minute, Pearl Harbor was bombed, Dad enlisted immediately to go fight Germans. But why was that? If America and the president knew what Hitler was doing and what was happening in Germany, why weren't we involved before Pearl Harbor was bombed? That's my question.
Well, I think the main reason is that the isolationist group in the United States prior to the war, I mean, Roosevelt was walking a very thin line, to try to get the Lend-Lease program and to get the draft reinstituted and so forth, knowing that we were going to eventually get involved in this. But 95% of the people, even though they knew what was going on, did not want to get involved. And if you go to the Holocaust Museum, there's one floor that has like really huge blow-ups of newspapers talking about all that was going on. There's the American ambassador to Berlin with the 36 Olympics. The book is called In the Garden of the Beast. And his daughter was dating an SS officer. So he knew what was going on. He sent that information back to the State Department and to Roosevelt to tell him how bad the Jews were being treated, especially after Kristallnacht in 1938, about how bad that was. But nobody really wanted to get involved from the experience of World War I. Once Pearl Harbor gets bombed, then we're good to go now. You went from 95% of the people that were against getting involved in the war to 95% of the people says we have to defend, the United States from being bombed by the Japanese. And then you had the argument, do we fight the Japanese first or do we fight the Germans first? And that decision was made at the higher levels of the U.S. government at the time.
The other element of this, I would venture, is even within Germany, even with the Jewish population within Germany, it took well into the late 30s before many of them woke up to the understanding. I guess Kristallnacht really, after that, it was hard not to deny it. But many of them, because they were such loyal Germans, many of them being heroes of the German army in World War I, just could not believe that the government would turn against them. So
Right.
even within Germany itself, it took a long time for it to set in.
I mean, you had 100,000 Jews that fought for the German army in World War I, 10,000 of them die. And they saw themselves as Germans. And you're right, they had no idea. And so they figured, well, this is just blow over like the rest of the pogroms that have taken place in Jewish history. And unfortunately, that was not the case. But the number of German Jews was about 543,000, and by that time, by 1938 or just after 1938, over half of them have left. But the other problem is other countries didn't want people immigrating to their countries because of the Great Depression. And then you have the anti-Semitism that's in the State Department that's not going to give those.
For 10 weeks, whatever you do, stop the flow of people going to their deaths. Maybe you don't save 1 million, maybe you don't save 100,000, but maybe you save 10 or 20,000 people from reaching that camp or from having to go to that camp just by the act of eliminating access. I cannot accept the fact that we couldn't do it. Maybe we didn't want to do it, but that we couldn't do something. I do not accept that. I'm sorry.
No,
Mark, I'm
I
talking
can.
about.
You're right. That's the argument, and that argument will probably go on from now until a long time down the road. There's no question.
Yeah,
That's a tough one.
Are there other questions? I was going to ask something of Colin, but I wanted to make sure, Colin, get you to unmute. Anything else? No? So one thing that's on the timeline here is the Einsatzgruppen in moving into Poland and the Soviet Union. And Colin, we've talked about you doing a program on that somewhere here in the next few months. We haven't set a date yet, right? But give us 2 or 3 minutes, Colin, if you would. Who came up with this concept? What was I hate to use the word rationale because it's so insane. It's hard to believe that word would apply. But what was the thinking behind this?
Well, we don't know who came up with the Einsatzgruppen operations, but the first commander was Erich von den Bach-Zalewski. He put it together with Gottlob Berger and a few others. Rasche and those guys. And these were all PhDs, MDs, lawyers, doctors. I mean, these were some of the brightest men in Germany who were in the SS. And the method of their madness was once the German troops pushed through Poland and pushed through Ukraine, pushed through Belarus into the Soviet Union, the Einsatzgruppe, and there were four of them, A, B, C, D, and they would move behind the German army and they would start mopping up, targeting Jews, political commissars, killing Russian prisoners of war, anyone in their way, really. And finally, when Karl Wolff, and I interviewed Karl Wolff, when Karl Wolff told me he and Himmler made a trip to the Ukraine, they witnessed an execution. And Himmler became so nauseated, that's why he said, we need a better method, hence the creation of the Wannsee Conference.
I'm just going to ask about the link to the Wannsee Conference.
Well,
So-
alcoholism rates and desertion rates among the Germans conducting the murders was becoming incredibly high, and the morale was plummeting. And I'm sure that Doug can tell you that there were a lot of issues with even among the SS guys who were not, born and bred to be mass murderers of women and children. That there were some serious issues involved in their heads. So Himmler and some others, including Frankel and those guys, decided, well, we need a better method. Hence, the starting out with the gas vans, following up on the old euthanasia T4 program, and then getting into the camps and the gas chambers and the crematoria aspect of it.
So Doug, if I could ask a question, we'll go to Gil. Doug, the Wannsee Conference, who ran it? Who's responsible for it? Were they held responsible at the Nuremberg trials?
There was 15 men that were there. Hitler was not there on purpose, so he would have deniability. Adolf Eichmann was the second in command that becomes the expert on Jews at the time. And Richard Heydrich was the major SS commander, the overseer of that, who eventually gets assassinated by two Czech commandos flown in by the British later on in the war. And then Eichmann takes over along with Himmler. They figure out a system. And that's why if everybody gets a chance to watch that film called The Conspiracy, is that it goes over each individual guy. There was one guy that was from the Chancellor building, Kritzinger, I think his name was, who has a blue suit on during the film. He's unaware of why he's there because he's been lied to about what this conference is about. The other 14 men that were there, they knew exactly why they were there in order to, how do we get rid of the 11 million Jews in Europe? And the one SS major stands up during the conference, and the actors that are in this film really said after they were done that they were very disturbed having to had played these parts. They were glad they did it, but they wouldn't do it a second time, just because of the mental anguish they were going through about how these men were going to do what they wanted to do. And they used the term evacuation. And there's a 16-page the Wannsee protocols that's available that you were not supposed to see in 2026 that was left in a filing cabinet and found after the war.
Yeah.
So they made a decision there, and most of the guys that were at that conference, and I don't remember the exact number, were held accountable on some level after the war. Some of them died before that. Some died in the bombings of Berlin. Others escaped and weren't tried. Several of them were executed. And there's a paper that I actually pass out to my students that tells exactly what happened to all 15 of these men.
So of all the, not only Jews, but all the people exterminated, what percentage of them came after the Wannsee Conference? The majority of them?
The majority of the killings take place afterwards. Like you have 1.5 million people that are murdered, okay, which is called the Holocaust by bullets by Father Dubois, who is a professor at Georgetown. And then afterwards, so you're probably looking at maybe 2 million people that are murdered prior to that date. And then after that, and Birnbaum goes into these numbers on a film called Engineering Evil. That's a documentary that you can watch on YouTube about the numbers after 43 into 43, 44 is where the vast majority of people are murdered. And most of those die in the concentration camps and also die in the death camp, the 6 death camps.
There's a note in the chat. I just saw it from a Bernard Willen. He recommends the German-Austrian film The Wannsee Conference, subtitled, but thinks it's very good.
Hmm.
You familiar with that movie?
No, I haven't watched that one. I use the HBO film. Thank you.
Bernard, he's got his hand up. Yes, is it Bernard?
Bernd. Bernd.
Bernd.
Name. I'm German. I was born and raised in Germany. My father and my uncles were in Hitler's military, and I have a number of stories related to what happened there. I have vivid stories from my mother on Kristallnacht, and I was just recommending this movie called Wannsee Conference, which is an Austrian-German film. It was a TV film that I think personally, taking anything away from it, I listen to it in German. I hear things differently, perhaps because of it. So I was just recommending that film on the chat. But it's a subject very close to my heart, the Holocaust and everything that happened. So this is an important conversation to have. What happened there is the most tragic thing you can imagine. I've studied a lot of this. I've read the Wannsee Protocol. I've been to the Villa 3 times. I've been to Yad Vashem. I served in Israel. I have met survivors from my hometown in Germany. In fact, I sent them their furniture. I found their old furniture. They ended up in Peru and things like that. So this is a very important conversation to be had all the time. So thank you.
And I will just add that Bernd is German, but he came to the United States when you were, what, 7 or 8 years old?
About 9.
9 years old. Ended up serving 30 years in the Army, retiring as a full colonel.
Well, thank you for your service, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
fascinating.
I have a certificate of from the Israeli IDF that means as much to me as any of my American awards, maybe even a little more, just because of the background. My father was a sailor on a destroyer, the German Navy, but my uncle served in Russia, Ukraine, and he saw some bad things. He was in the infantry, combat engineer, things like that. So I've studied this. It's very near and dear to my heart because it just breaks your heart.
Bernd, I'm sorry to interrupt here. I see Debbie Stuber also put a note in the chat and would like to talk to you. Debbie is great. I would absolutely recommend you talk to her if you can. Do you, you mentioned you went out of your way to return a piece of furniture that you found in Peru to a survivor. Do you, because you were born in Germany and your parents were German, do you feel like a special responsibility, I guess, to know about it or to act?
There is Germans grow up with a sense of guilt. You just can't avoid that. And it has taken a long time. I mean, docents at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, there are many German docents there. They work there for free because it is a sense of guilt that just there. It's just really, you can't get rid of it. Especially, in fact, I had read many decades ago, the first generation post-Holocaust, Jews and Germans are the most affected by what has happened, there because of this sense of guilt and responsibility, because you can't excuse it. And so you study this stuff because you want to understand why. I've read Hirsch's book, the commandant at Auschwitz that you referenced, the presenter reference. I'm sorry about your name. Things like that, why? They asked one of the questions from the author, there was a ghostwriter, French ghostwriter that wrote it with him while he was in the detention in Poland during the trial before they hung him at Auschwitz. And one of the questions was, well, why did you guys do this? What was the mindset? How did you do? Were you able to deal with this? And he said, look, we've been taught since we were children that all our problems are due to the Jews. This goes to the anti-Semitism that goes way back, 1800s. There's the Jewish Museum in Berlin has a whole story about that, about anti-Semitism in Germany going much further back. And we were told that the Jews were the source of all our problems. And we just believed it. We were kids. We were indoctrinated. And so when Himmler said to his minions, hey, I know this is hard. We're going to have to do this hard task. He said to them that they just took it as a reason to why to do it, and that even our leaders thought it was a hard thing. At least that's what they were told by Himmler and then Heydrich. The Wannsee Conference there's a lot of young Jews that go there that I've seen there. They're very quiet. It just affects them because of the consequences of all the German ministries there being coordinated for this final solution in places like Auschwitz and all the concentration camps. My mother went to school. The gentleman I talked about, who's furniture. I come from a small town, and she told me about she was Catholic in a Protestant area. They had religious instruction at school. The teacher would say every morning, the Jews and the Catholics can now leave. So for an hour, they stood in the schoolyard while this religious instruction was going on in the classroom. And she knew this guy. His name is Walter Frank. He told me, I met him several times. I flew to Peru to meet him and his family. And he said, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit there. He told me that he was second or third cousin of Anne Frank. Anne Frank came from Frankfurt, which is near my hometown, and his name was Frank also, like Anne's. So there's these connections that you find. There's one. My mother, when she saw Kristallnacht, she was coming home from bringing dinner to my grandfather at the railway. That's where he worked. And there was all this commotion going on in town. And she didn't know, she was only like also 8, 9 years old. She said she walked by one of the houses on the main street. The family was the Khan family. 5 daughters, a husband, wife, 5 daughters. They were standing on the street in their nightgowns, and everything was thrown out on the street from these SA guys who were the guys perpetrating the Kristallnacht. They were from other towns. They weren't from my hometown. They would send gangs of these guys to other towns, so nobody knew them. It wasn't your own people that was throwing things out the windows of houses and whatnot. And she remembered that, and she told me she didn't know what was going on, but all the girls are standing there in their nightgowns. And it was just tragic stories like this. That family, and there were some stories, they tried to get it, almost made it, but all five of these girls and the mother and father were killed at Auschwitz. One was not at Auschwitz, and because she was the oldest one, she was already out of the house. So it's just tragic. In Germany, they have what they call these brass plates, Stolpersteine. Stolpersteine is what they call tripping stones. They're brass plates in front of homes where Jews used to live. And so you're walking along and you see these plates on the ground, and it tells the name of the person that lived there and what happened to them. Just a little overview of that. And you see those all over the place, and it's just heartbreaking, So so many stories.
Bert, thank you so very much. I mean, imagine we could have you on and listen to you for a lot longer. And I think we should try to do that. Todd, you have Bernd's contact information. Yeah. It's gotten to be 8 o'clock. Todd, did you want to take any station break? Because I'd like to get back to our guest PowerPoint and try to get through that. But
yeah, I'll just quickly say that we have an open conversation on Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. That is 4 p.m. Pacific, where Bernd is. That's Monday night at 7 p.m. Please do join us if you can. Truly an open conversation. And then we're back a week from today with Brooke Kroger, who's a historian who's writing about and has written about women journalists of World War II.
Yeah, she's very, very brilliant, great writer. There's at least two that we're going to focus on for that night. So.
Right.
Let's get back if we could hold the questions now for a bit, just to give Doug a chance to dig into more of what he had to say. Okay, Doug. I want
yeah, go to the next slide.
whatever we plan to do never works out.
That's okay. For those of you that have insomnia and can't sleep at night, I would suggest you read Mein Kampf. It's probably the worst book that I ever had to read in my entire life, but it plays out everything of his. And there's been several authors that have done some really good books. Most recently, a German historian, Ian Kershaw, a British historian, had written this book as a two-part series, along with a German historian that just recently finished up his anthology about Hitler. And there's new information that comes out, periodically, and I try to keep up on that in case kids ask me something that I may or may not know. Go ahead, you can go to the next one. And you have a lot of good propaganda. Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister. This is most famous with the SA guys in the background. He has the light of Providence coming with the eagle on the back of him, and he's going to save Germany from themselves. Go ahead. And this is, the Nuremberg rallies where there's about 750,000 people here. And this is the first one that they held with Hitler in the front. Himmler's here, and the new head of the SA is here, whose name I always forget. But the first guy that took that job was Ernst Röhm. Hitler will march all the way back up from the podium. Leni Riefenstahl, who did this film called Triumph of the Will, probably one of the best propaganda films ever made, and she's still considered the highlight of this, along with Goebbels. Go ahead. Which they portrayed a lot of stuff in the 1936 Olympics. This is when they bring all the Nazi flags for every single German town, has their own standard, pretty much like the Romans. The Germans were very good at copying what other people have done to try to get them to buy into what they were selling, and they did do a good job about that, unfortunately. Go ahead. Most of you have probably seen this, Albrecht Mock Fry. This is Dachau, a camp I have not been to. I've been to 7 camps, this one in Buchenwald, which I'd like to visit eventually, maybe in the future. And I'm actually hosting a gentleman at our university who's 104 years old that spent 2 weeks at Buchenwald as a combat medic for the 45th Evacuation Hospital. Tim Canary, if you want to look him up, he was portrayed on ABC News 2 summers ago when they had the 80th anniversary of D-Day. But this is the front, and which is not, you weren't getting out, there's no doubt. Go ahead. This is Auschwitz I. That sign is still there. These barracks were built for the Polish army, and then they were eventually used for the first prisoners. One thing I think I forgot to mention, a lot of people don't realize, is that the Nazis did not kill Jews first. They murdered 70,000 of their own people, which Colin had mentioned with the euthanasia program, also known as T4, where they eliminated people that they felt had physical and mental disabilities. And then they practiced with the buses and so forth how to use gas. And then they maximize that by using Zyklon B later on. Go ahead. And this is in Auschwitz. I've been here 3 times. It's a brutal place. It really is. The one for me, though, is not so much this camp, but the Majdanek death camp in Lublin, Poland, where they murdered almost, I'm going to mess the number up, so I won't give a number on that. Every once in a while, I'll forget them as you get older. And that is an actual train car. This photograph I took on the top of that building, and this camp is huge. From the front of the camp to the back of the camp is about a mile. And the crematorium and gas chambers 2, 3, 4, and 5 are in the back of the camp, where they were murdering about 8,000 people every single day. Go ahead. Now, the liberation of the camps, and the first one, as you can see, for the Americans is Ohrdruf, where Eisenhower went, along with Bradley and Patton. And that was, I think, April 12th, 1945. The Russians had already not eliminated, but they had liberated Auschwitz on January 27th, along with then all 6 death camps were liberated by by the Russians, or at that time the Soviet Union. And there had been revolts, like I said, there was 54 people that had to revolt. The Soviet War that escaped, and they survived the war. There were 17 men that survived. Treblinka, only 2 people from Belzec. So surviving a death camp was not something that one was going to do. I've been to Sachsenhausen, which is where they actually were doing the counterfeiting, which a lot of people are unaware of. They counterfeited in present day money $6 billion in British pounds. They were in the process of making American currency, but the war ended and that never got off the ground.
Theresienstadt. I guess I'm a little surprised that it's characterized as a death camp. I know early in the war, wasn't that the sort of showpiece camp that they
Yeah, that
used?
wasn't a death camp. That was not one of the 6 death camps. Theresienstadt was a model camp where the International Red Cross went to. I actually was on a trip in 2001 with a woman whose father was a doctor in Germany, and she ended up there, and she was one of the 100 children that survived Theresienstadt, also known in Czech as Terezín.
Okay.
Go ahead. And this is in Auschwitz, where there's thousands of pairs of shoes, actually about 80,000 pairs of shoes that are there, along with a lot of other stuff. This is crematorium 2 that was blown up. And the deniers love this because they say, you can't show us any dead people here. There's no residue of Zyklon B gas. There's no way that they could have done what they did. The Germans would have never done that. I actually had a student 3 semesters ago that said to me, you mean there's actually people that deny the Holocaust? And yes, unfortunately there are. Go ahead. Now this gentleman, this was 2020, just before COVID hit. This is a friend of David Wishnir, Ralph Hackman, who worked in the sauna, and the sauna is not like what we think of as a sauna. A sauna was where they washed all the clothes, fixed them back up, put them back on the trains, and took them back to the cities that had been done by Allied bombing. And we were having breakfast here, and I'll show you the next slide, is that he was actually tattooed twice. And that number 37495 is also on the inside of his arm because the guy that did the tattoo messed it up. And they said you have to get tattooed a second time. Unfortunately, in March of 2020, Ralph died of COVID in California. And him and David worked together. And this was the only guy at Auschwitz for that commemoration that David and Ralph, they were the only 2 that knew each other. And this is David Wishnir, who has an incredible story, which hopefully you'll hear about this in more detail in June. He was arrested, got taken to Auschwitz at 16, spoke 5 languages, which saved his life, and he sang. He then did the death march after 2.5 years in Auschwitz, ended up at Dachau, volunteers to get on a train to Austria to build bunkers underground for the Luftwaffe, jumps off the train, kills a guard. 3 days later, joins the 101st Airborne, and that's why he has that uniform on, and fought with them to the end of the war.
When you say
that's the short version.
They sort of linked up with the 101st Airborne and they took him in.
Yes.
As a, wow.
He becomes an official interpreter because he speaks German fluently.
Is this man still alive?
No, he passed away in 2022, unfortunately, at 95.
His book.
And this is his book. We used to go to the Reading World War II weekends in June for the anniversary of the D-Day invasion. And there was, hundreds of, actually there was about 25,000 people there. And David would talk 3 times, and there'd be at least 300 or 400 people that would listen to his story. And then he would sign copies of his book, which are available if you would like. But I drove him around for years. I was a very, very fortunate man to have met him in 1996. I was unable to get him to speak to my students till 2004. And I said, David, I'll get 25 of my best students, come down to the library and we'll have lunch. He goes, you're going to have lunch? And I go, yeah. He goes, what do you have? And I go, whatever you want. If I would have known if I had offered him lunch in 1997, I would have done that, but I didn't know that was going to be the key to open the door to get him to speak to my students. And from that point on, from 2004 until the last time he spoke, probably in 2018 or so, maybe 19. He spoke to over 10,000 people and shared his story. His
Wow.
family did not know half of what's in that book. In fact, his son, who was 13, taking social studies classes, came home one day and David said to him, he goes, Eric, what are you studying in school? He goes, well, we're doing World War II. He says, well, are you going to do the Holocaust? He goes, well, I don't know if we do that in middle school. He goes, but they say they're going to do it in high school. He goes, why are you asking about that? You're a World War II veteran. He goes, well, I was in Auschwitz. That's the first time his son knew.
Wow. And this book is in his words?
Those are in his words. He had been interviewed by a woman, and then we did some other interviewing at the university. And I ended up writing most of his stuff because I go, David, I said, you got to write these things. He goes, look, I don't write, I sing. I'm a singer. If you want to write, you write it and I'll okay it and we'll go ahead and get it published. So that's how that happened. And really, the really reason was my students asked him, where's your book? And he goes, well, I sing, I don't write. So from that point on, and this was published in 2015.
I'm looking forward to reading it and then having you on sometime in June. So, and this
was at 2020 at the commemoration for the 80th or excuse me, the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And David was going to sing the last song of the Dead at the end of the program.
Did he?
Yes, he did. It was, I was shocked. I don't know how the man did it. He was physically not well. He had some medical issues, and his family and I didn't know if he was going to be able to make this trip. And he says, I'm going back to Poland one more time. And he got up, and it was a little shaky for the first 15 seconds. And then he just belted out this song. It was incredible. You can actually watch that live on YouTube.
Would be fascinating.
And this is what that building's the real building. They had this tent that had 2,000 people in it to watch the commemoration, and people spoke, different dignitaries, and several Polish people spoke as well. It was very moving, needless to say.
And we end with Nuremberg.
Nuremberg trials. We have a few minutes here, which most of you haven't seen the new film Nuremberg. Do yourself a favor and watch that. You may want to watch the original that's in black and white. As you can see here is Göring, here is Hess, and the other, here's Speer, who, quote, becomes the good Nazi, but he's not. I was very fortunate at the two World War II weekends that David and I had gone to. There was a lieutenant there that was retired, obviously, that was one of the guards at Nuremberg. And he goes, and I asked him, because we had downtime, because we were there usually early before the people were allowed in. And I said, I have one question for you. And he goes, go ahead. I know what your question is. He goes, you want to know who gave Göring the pill that killed him? And I go, correct. And he goes, we don't know.
Yeah, I think it's all speculative.
Yes.
Talk about names. Yeah. So let's end up here so we can get to a few questions. I would just say, by the way, I went to see Nuremberg when it came out. It's a great movie in terms of drama and characters. The actor who plays Göring, if he doesn't win the Academy Award, I don't understand.
Yeah, Russell Crowe did an outstanding job.
But it is patently wrong as to the history. If you want to watch a really good movie, watch the black and white movie I think you're referring to, Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961. It's not about the main Nuremberg trial. It's about the third trial, the trial of the judges. But the themes, the moral questions are all treated there relative to Nuremberg. And it's even though it's fiction, it's about a real trial, and it's actually a much better film.
Yes.
Anyway, okay. Last thoughts, Dave, Doug?
I think the one thing is that's on the Holocaust Museum down in DC. And Eisenhower was very prophetic when he said eventually people are going to say this is propaganda, and it did not happen. So he was a visionary. There's no question about that, about what took place, during this time. And the other thing about the trials is there were actually 13 trials, and you can still be held accountable for what you had done here. There's a really good film that was done by a British historian called Final Account about there was about 1 million people that perpetrated, both Germans and non-Germans, that perpetrated these crimes, and only about 1% were ever tried, unfortunately. So most people got away with this. This is a photograph that I took at the end of the day when we visited the building that David had worked in, of Crematorium 2, and you would walk down there into the steps, undress, and then go into the gas chambers. And then just down the road, maybe 30 or 40 feet, were the crematoriums that burned all the bodies.
Hmm.
And I always end my classes with bison because it's my favorite animal. But this is important mainly because the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything, by Albert Einstein.
So true. So true. David, I'm going to stop it there, go back to our audience. And Todd, David has given me a great idea. He likes buffaloes. I like elephants. I watch all the National Geographic's on elephants. I'm going to put up a picture of an elephant now at the end of all my lectures.
One last thing, a friend of mine, Bob Holden, who's on this tonight evening, him and I actually had gone to China, which a lot of people are unaware of. Even the Pacific War almost takes a back seat, unfortunately, to the European theater. And we had gone there to do a curriculum for the state of New Jersey on the Nanking Massacre, which a lot of people are unaware of. That was done by Iris Chang in her book, The Rape of Nanking. And that was very difficult. The Canadian teachers that we were there, 15 of them, they had not been to Auschwitz or any of these camps like Bob and I had. And it was interesting to see their reaction and also our reaction to what took place and the things that were done by the Japanese government, which they to this day have not really come clean on either, as far as that being a genocide. But thank you very much, everybody. If you have questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. We have about 15 minutes or so, but that's entirely up to everyone here.
Sure, I see lots of hands up. We'll start with Susan. I know you had your hand up first. Question?
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to share something that I've never shared with Doug that I should have, but I was on a flight from France to the United States as a passenger, and I asked to be reseated because there were a bunch of kids screaming where I was sitting, and I love kids, but I just couldn't sit there for 8 hours. And I wound up sitting next to this amazing woman. It was like Besheret, which is in Yiddish means it was meant to be. I sat next to this woman named Marilyn, and it turned out that both of her parents were Holocaust survivors. And she went to Israel to a kibbutz in college, and she met this great guy named Eric, and they wound up falling in love and getting married, and she moved to Israel and was with Eric for many years. And she's still there. Well, actually, she's back in France, but it turned out that Marilyn's mother and father were exterminated by the Germans. Eric's parents in France, this was amazing. His father was the head of the French resistance, okay? He was the head of the French resistance against the Nazis. And his mother was this gorgeous blonde who spoke fluent German with no French accent, okay? And she would go up and down the railroad tracks. I can't believe I didn't tell you this, Doug. She would go up and down the railroad tracks with Louis Vuitton luggage and bomb the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
And what an amazing story. I tried to get this to Spielberg, but I never could get it to him. But so her father-in-law was the head of the French resistance, and her mother-in-law was bombing railroad tracks with Louis Vuitton luggage. She spoke French she spoke German with no French accent. I think that is so cool. And I need to hook you up with her to get the complete story, Doug.
Yes, please.
I will. But isn't that amazing?
So many of these stories that are fascinating. Thank you, Susan. Justin Miller, you had your hand up. I've unmuted you.
Yes, the interesting thing tonight is you remind me of a confrontation or conference kind of thing of several of us when I was in the service. And my question was, if there had not been the Holocaust, what would a World War II look like?
Well,
We
that's a very good what if question. That's almost like people ask me, even students have asked me, if Hitler had not been Hitler, would there have been a Holocaust? And based on what we know right now, probably not. I mean, but you never know. I mean, whether Ernst Röhm or Anton Drexler, who founded the German Workers' Party previous to the Nazis being founded by Hitler, that's a tough one.
I'd like to tackle that question if I could,
Go, Colin.
because I interviewed Karl Wolff. You know who he was,
Yes.
and Gerhard Klopfer, who was at Wannsee, and some others. If Hitler had not been Hitler, there might not have been a Holocaust, because the people that Hitler elected to place into positions of power, Goering, who was involved in the Holocaust, the starvation of Greece, for instance, Himmler and Heydrich and those guys, if Hitler had not appointed those individual people who were really involved in this heavily and enthusiastically, there may not have been, because there was anti-Semitism in Germany, but the most rabid people who were not really on board with Hitler's line of thinking were wiped out by the purge anyway. So you may be very correct in that.
Great alternative history question, but one that we could talk about for hours with no conclusion. Chris,
my quick one was that in our conversation, which was some of my good friends who are Jewish, would that have bolstered the economics of the Second World War in favor of Germany by not having that kind of resources set in a different direction? If all those resources had come against us, would it have changed things very much?
That's a good. I would probably think so, because you're looking at trains after trains after trains, taking hundreds of thousands of people, and even you had 8,000 Einsatzgruppen guys, and then you had all the police battalions that were connected with them, and then you had all the collaborators in Lithuania and Poland, all right, that were helping the Germans. If they had used all of those resources to fight the Russians, which wasn't the smart move to begin with, then that could have changed, the whole dynamic. The paradigm might have changed then as a result of that.
Chris Perlow.
Of course, you have Hitler declared war on us instead of keeping his mouth shut.
Yeah, why he did that 3 days later, who knows? But he was under the impression even that maybe the United States, since there were so many German Americans, that they would go along with him. In fact, there were a lot of sympathetic people here. I mean, Henry Ford was one of the most lethal anti-Semites in this country, who republished the Protocols of Zion, all right, and got the highest civilian award given to him by Hitler over in Germany. So
yeah, Lindbergh too.
Yes, so there's a lot of crossing of the paths there.
Sorry about
that. Doug, thank you for being here tonight and adding so much context and order to what we already know and some things we don't know. I wonder if you could cooperate this. A couple days ago, I saw something on the internet. Hermann Goering had a half-brother who was the total opposite personality and spent his time saving people, trading on his name, and sometimes soliciting favors from him to get people out of harm's way. Is that true, or do you know anything about that?
I've heard that just recently. It's interesting you bring that up, because I've heard that before, but I haven't, been able to corroborate that myself. And I haven't even read actually a biography of Goering, to get more details, about him. That his father was one of the guys that carried out, the genocide against the Namahareros in German West Africa, which I think a lot of people are unaware of.
Apparently, after he had surrendered himself to the authorities there and pled his case. He was going to be tried also, but witnesses came forward, and one of the prosecutors, believe it or not, had a relative on this list of people he saved that they had.
Wow.
And so by producing that witness, they got him out of trouble. But he died in obscurity in 1966. But he's credited with possibly saving as many as 5,000 people in different cities of
I'll have to
Europe.
do more research on that. Thank you very much.
Greg Yost.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. As you say, this is a 2-semester course and you're trying to condense it into this very brief period. And I think you did a great job. This is absolutely terrific.
Thank you very much.
On this program, I tend to sort of be a big picture, deep roots kind of person. And I wanted to mention to sort of all of the people on here that if you could imagine in your mind a map of Europe, just a generic map of Europe. If you take the region from roughly the Baltic states through sort of Poland and what would today be Belarus and Ukraine, that was a region called the Pale of Settlement.
Yes.
Going back to the 1700s, 1800s.
Mhm.
It originated from the very tolerant Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania, which allowed people from any religion, any culture, or whatever to settle. So it created more or less the world's largest area of Jewish people in the entire world. I mean,
Yes.
whatever, including not only sort of in Western Europe, there were sort of urban Jews with skills and trades and everything, but the whole panoply, the fiddler on the roof peasant, Jews in shtetls.
Mhm.
Why am I saying this? Because if you look at if you imagine in your head the map of Operation Barbarossa when the Germans, Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, that was the area that they captured. And the number of Jews they found in that area and other people that Hitler didn't like was just astronomical. So
Mhm.
when you think of Wannsee starting only in January of 42, that was because they didn't know what to do with all of these people.
Right.
In Germany, they were still, actually, a friend of mine's mother-in-law, who's no longer with us, was a German Jew who lived in Berlin, survived the entire war with her ration card. And that was very, very rare, an exception to the rule. But nonetheless, it wasn't in Germany sort of line them up and shoot them or gas them, if only because they had so many skills. So many of the Jews in Germany had skills that they wanted to put to use. The percentage of German and Austrian Jews who survived World War II was actually greater than Polish, Lithuanian, Belarusian, whatever. So just in terms of the big picture there, a reason for the 42 acceleration of the whole process has to do with the Germans capturing that area of land that literally on planet Earth had the largest number of Jews anywhere on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happens, that meeting was actually supposed to be held in December, but when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, it gets postponed to January. And then you had several of the Einsatzgruppen commanders were at the Wannsee conference meeting. And they then decided that you're right. Well, what are we going to do with all these people? And they says we have to find, a final solution to the Jewish question, or quote, the Jewish problem. And then they took it upon themselves, because everybody was working towards the Fuhrer in order to solve the problem that he wanted solved, to get rid of all the Jews. And the easiest thing was to shoot them. And as Colin has mentioned, that got to be a really big problem. You only can drink so much alcohol and shoot somewhat safe where you're trying to murder these people, bullet by bullet by bullet by bullet. And psychologically, that just ought to be too much for a lot of the soldiers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Greg.
Debbie.
Hi there. Doug, hi, Glenn.
Hi, Debbie.
So Doug, I just want to thank you so much for educating us on this topic. I'm a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. It's really interesting. In general, I think a lot of people, when they think of Holocaust survivors, they think concentration camps. My parents were hidden in France during the war. And Susan, I heard you mentioning earlier about the French resistance. My father was in the French resistance in France during World War II. I know that I'm going to be speaking with Glenn soon because I'm going to be doing a talk for VBC. I also wanted to mention, for those of you who live in Pittsburgh, I'm speaking at Grist House Command at the former Nike missile site on March 24th at 7 p.m. You all can come if you live in the area. There's no RSVP needed. And then, Doug, you were talking about, I don't know if you've said this, and I'll be honest, I joined late, about the Einsatzgruppen and Father Patrick Desbois, who has found thousands of mass graves in Eastern Europe. A lot of people don't know that it's 1.5 million who were murdered that way, and they were marched from their villages to mass graves where they were shot. And many villagers had to participate in, or they would have been murdered as well.
Yeah, we had gone over that. And
I apologize. I
no,
jumped
no,
in.
not at all. No, feel free. It's always good to repeat things. I actually had one of my students one time said to me after class, "Can I see you after class?" And I said, "Yeah." I go, "What's the issue?" And she says, "Well, you know, you were going to talk about the Einsatzgruppen tomorrow." And she goes, "I wanted to let you know that my great grandfather was a major in the Einsatzgruppen." And
Oh.
I really was kind of stunned at that. I'm going, okay, how do I deal with this? Because she's going to find out that her great grandfather was a murderer of about 1.5 million people as a result of being in this unit, because she was told by her grandparents and her parents that he was a war hero for the Germans during World War II.
How'd you take it?
Well, what I did was I went and talked to my supervisor, to the school psychologist and her guidance counselor, feeling she's going to go home. And how are we going to deal with this issue if she does go home? Because her teacher is going to tell her that her great grandfather was not such a nice man. So when I went through the thing and I, talked it over, and I said, "Can I see you after class today?" And I said, "This is going to be a difficult day for you." And she goes, "Is all of that really true, what you just said?" I said, "I don't know specifically if your great grandfather pulled the trigger on anybody, but if he was a major, there's a good chance that he might have been at a minimum a battalion commander, or at the very minimum, a captain of a unit of about 260 guys." I said, "That is a possibility." And she, we talked, and she talked to her parents. That opened up a whole can of worms, needless to say, but it didn't really blow up as bad as I thought it might be, because I'm telling this, and I go, "Look, you have no connection to that other than by blood, and you did not perpetrate any crime." And I have a lot of students of German background, and when I bring a survivor in, they'll say to me, "Is it okay if I speak with David or Esther or, Rabbi Cohen or whoever the survivor might have been?" And I said, "Sure. They don't hold any grudges against you.
No.
And you're learning this material. In fact, they're happy that you're listening to their stories. That's the most important thing."
So years ago at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, young Germans who graduate have a choice. They can go into the armed forces, or they can also do a social program. And a lot of them came to Pittsburgh, and they volunteered for the Holocaust Center for a year or two, and they connected with the survivors, and the survivors adopted them. They thought they were, my father and mother have no animosity towards young Germans. You have nothing, they had nothing to do with it. I also wanted to mention you, Doug, that one of your colleagues
Irving,
from Stockton, I'm
yes.
sorry?
Irving Rodriguez.
Yes.
Yes.
He came to Pittsburgh several years ago, and
he's
he
a
had
great
an
guy.
amazing presentation.
Yeah, he runs our program at Stockton. He's the head
Yes.
of the Resource Center.
Todd, we got
Thank you.
time for a couple more. I know we're running over.
2 more. Yeah. Gil, make it quick.
Yeah. This reminds me of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'd like to make a couple of statements that I think Doug will agree on. First of all, the Germans made their own problem. When Jews immigrated from Russia or wherever, they had to take the last name of a bush or a tree, Rosenbaum, Kirschgessner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were not allowed to participate in learning any skills that had to do with the hand trades, carpentry, plumbing, electricity. They had no choices but to become lawyers, doctors, pianists, soloists, singing in the opera, etc. And when they became wealthy, of course, the average German became very jealous of the Jews, who'd simply had to do to survive what the Germans required of them. The other good point is this, it was not brought up. There were a lot of Germans. First of all Germans were not Nazis. The only Nazis were members of the party. There were a lot of Germans who hid Jews, just like Debbie, I think you said, they were hidden in France. They hid in the basement of a Gentile's home all during the war. The Gentile got one ration, split it with the Jew downstairs. And I know personally where an Army artillery captain at the end of the war came in to become the mayor. And a woman came in and said, I've got to talk to the boss. She said, I got a problem. I've got a Jewish woman in my cellar. If I let her turn her out in the street, half the people are going to hug her, the other half are going to try to kill her. Can you please come and pick her up? He said, I just declared that there's a bomb that has to be cleared from near your home. He sent a 3/4-ton truck down there, sent everybody within 5 blocks away from it so nobody could see what happened. They took the lady out, put her in the 3/4-ton truck, dropped the canvas, took her to safety.
Great story.
There are a lot of stories like that. A lot of them.
And
Yeah.
let's go to Scott. Scott, you're going to be our last commentator tonight.
Okay, I have a question for Doug. And Doug, I want to say that this was a fantastic program. I'm a high school history teacher up in Toronto, and we cover the Holocaust and the war really extensively. We've interviewed Debbie's parents and hundreds of other survivors. I have a question about your covering this topic in class, because I'm sure it's an issue that you run into, and I've run into it in the last few years in particular, teaching the Holocaust while the present conflict is going on in the Middle East. That's a question that comes up from students all the time. It's a difficult one, and I'm curious as to how you respond to that.
What I usually do is I try to say, which was mentioned, I think, before by Gilbert, is that you look at history at the time period that it's taking place. Last semester, when we're even going back to October 7th, and then I would bring it up or they would bring it up in class, because current events and what's going on right now, I know we are on spring break this week, and on Tuesday we'll mention the war and we'll go over that. I try to see where they are and let them discuss that. And just, and the way I've done it, even with the high school students, I said, look, you can disagree with somebody and you can dislike their opinion, but please be respectful. And if you're not going to be respectful, then don't say anything. And like my dad had told me when I was younger, and his father probably told him, engage your brain before you engage your mouth. And so therefore, what's going to happen is that you can have a really good discussion and they can disagree, but I don't really try to put my politics out there unless they ask what I think about something. So I try to keep that fine line, because that's not my job. My job is to go over the history in this class. If we want to make it relevant to what's going on right now, that's fine. And then if I do make a mistake on that, my wife is more than happy to explain to me, you have to be careful when you're in class. And she's correct, because they're not paying that kind of money to listen to me and my politics. So therefore, we'll make that discussion and have that discussion. And that's going to be ongoing now, probably till the end of the semester, because I don't think this is going to end anytime soon. And we'll discuss different things, about how they relate to what goes on. And then they'll throw the words out. Like I even saw, unfortunately, and this was last semester, when a lot of the stuff with the protesting on the college campuses, and people were throwing the word out, genocide. I must have spent 20, 30 hours reading scholarly experts on the term genocide from college professors around the United States and Israel and also in England. And both of them were pretty much split down the difference whether what was going on in Gaza was genocide or not. And I'm not a scholar at that level, so I'm not going to argue with them. And I said, look, do your research. I know you get a lot of information off of Facebook, and people have degrees from the University of Facebook, and that's a problem in and of itself. All right, so we have to make sure that we're dealing with factual information. And then you're going to make a decision and draw a conclusion, pretty much like the bombing of Auschwitz. I mean, do your research, look up some things, find your information, and you decide what you think. So that's how I cover it, even with the high school kids.
Thank you,
Very
Todd.
well put.
God bless you, Douglas. God bless you. Oh my gosh. If more Americans, I think, reasoned through and thought, engage their brain before they engage their mouth, I think that would all be better off.
Easier said than done.
Oh my
Yes.
God. Yeah. Talk about it.
Well, look, we're way over our time limit. I want to thank all of you for being on. Particularly want to thank Doug. Doug, this was excellent. You did a great job of putting into an hour what normally would take the whole semester to try to explain. Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for the introduction to Doug. And stay tuned. We've got several more programs on the Holocaust planned in the next couple of months, and we look forward to having you all. Todd, any last remarks?
Take care. Enjoy the weekend. I hope to see you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.